And we can play tunes on whether it's to do with the land that's irrigated or the land that's just under rain-fed. And it's possible to just get us out of this. And freeing up some of that water might also then have positive impacts on for example, biodiversity. And here, just to illustrate that, I'm showing the fish caught in Australia, both in the oceans and the river systems, and that's peaked in the 1990s, like it has around the globe. And again, it's possible by not letting the market have unfettered go at the fish, but having some policies about how you fish carefully. It's possible to actually maintain your fishing rates and not let the stocks decline. And maybe there's some hope that the quotas that were introduced a few years ago are actually getting us on that trajectory. And maybe another bit of perhaps good news that I'm just going to throw in here is, and this really needs a lot more work, and it's very hard to see on the screen, so I don't know whether your printouts show it well. But under those scenarios that we've just been looking at, GDP can grow into the future, and of course it is higher in total for a larger population. But the interesting thing is that for a smaller population, the GDP per capita is actually higher than the larger populations. So now, just before I go into fairly quickly the last few slides, which try to sum up in the big picture, just put up this again as a reminder that there are numerous challenges there, and I haven't even touched on lots of the others. We've only looked at ageing, for example, in the demographics, or about the problem of obesity, providing all the health care for those people in the future. We haven't even looked at any of the issues to do with changing the energy sources and so on. And as I said at the start, you might like to contemplate how trying to fix one issue makes it harder or makes things worse for the others. So just a few slides that I've called the big picture. And I think we've got to take a wider view over history, whereas economics tends to take a very narrow view, behaviour from the recent past century. And you can look at other complex societies that had technologies, arts, militaries, finances, like the Romans, and they crashed very quickly. I've mentioned the issue of the rebound effect, technology being a double-edged sword. And a classic example of this, I think, is to do with the greenhouse effect, where we've been cleaning up our fuels for a century and a half. The carbon intensity per dollar of GDP or per unit of energy has been coming down for a century and a half. But at the same time, our emissions have been going up. So cleaning up, being more efficient is not necessarily the answer. Mark also had some brief mentions to the limits to growth. And here I've taken, this was a system model of the globe done in the 1970s and looking out to the end of this century. And I've taken their standard run scenarios. You see some of their graphs of resources coming down, population growth, pollution, the food per capita, industrial output and services per capita. And the solid points on there are observed data, and they match remarkably well and do not match the other scenarios that they put in there. It's no proof that this model system, the limits to growth, is right, but it's a real cautionary note. So what can we do? I think it's all about changing behaviour. We probably need influence at many different levels, but a lot of that has to be at grassroots, at least to send a message for politicians or leaders to make changes. And for me, that means things like riding a bike, buying less, and something which I think always sort of stimulates a bit of discussion, and that is get mothers or women and mothers into positions of leadership. Take man out of the equation. And I think we have to be careful not to be apathetic about this. But that said, we perhaps are just on the cusp of having the choice of whether we want to be on a different boat or whether we're going to be jumping for lifeboats. And this is the wrap-up. This is my cutting back to the very beginning slide where we talked about sort of this as an insurance issue. It's not certain that we're going to be in this horrible future. And to try and put some numbers to stimulate your discussion on what you think the likelihoods are, I've put some here. So what's the likelihood of that we're staying in a business as usual scenario and having some bad outcomes? Well, maybe it's one in 10, 1 in 1,000 if you're optimistic. If you're listening to a lot of climate change science at the moment, some people are saying we're already past this point. Maybe it's 1 in 1. And then on the other hand, on the other side of the ledger, what's the possibility of avoiding that business as usual? And maybe it's 1 in 10 to change our behaviour, 1 in 3 to technology is much more certain to come about, technological progress. And would we have a 1 in 5 chance of changing population? When you multiply these together, the probability of avoiding the bad outcome is lower than the likelihood of it coming about. That's all very rough, and hopefully you'll go away and think about what you think are the likelihoods and bad outcomes and so on. Thank you.